So awesome. So once again, welcome everybody. If you were trying to participate in the Growing Your Enrollment Yield webinar, you're in the right place. We are working on marketing to Gen Z, part 2, with the phenomenal Dr. Meghan Grace. She was here with us a few weeks ago, and her data, her statistics, everything was mind-blowing. So I'm going to be introducing her. But in the meantime, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about just some of the things to expect. And then I'm going to give her the floor because she has a lot to share. So Zoom housekeeping, as you're all rolling in, just a quick reminder, we have the chat function, we have the raise hand function, we have Q&A, and we also have something that we're super excited about, which is the captions. So feel free to click on that, and then you could see the subtitles, and Zoom is pretty good with that. You can even change the language if you would like. But if you have any questions along the way, please share in the Q&A or in chat, or just raise your hand. And if you feel you're ready to speak, then we'll ask you to join us, and you can also speak, as long as you're aware that we are recording. So once again, this is part of the series. We've had some phenomenal speakers already. We talked about creator economy, inclusive language, marketing Gen Z part 1, and you're here for part 2. And then we also had attracting non-traditional students. So if you didn't get a chance to watch live, you should have access to the recordings. Please go ahead, watch the recordings. If you have any questions, let me know. And after this session, we also have Katie Jensen is going to be talking to us about the inclusive and equitable content across the recruitment funnel. I'm really excited about that. And then we'll have the metaverse conversation as well. So what exactly is it and how can you use it? So looking forward to that. If you don't know much about Olark, because I see quite a few new participants, Olark is Olark Live Chart makes the simplest and most accessible way to connect with students when and where they need you the most. And we're really excited. We're really committed to accessibility. We want everybody to be able to have access to live chat. And we've spent the last 13 plus years perfecting tools that help teams reach their goals through timely messaging and support. Our higher ed clients love Olark's flexible chatbots and automation tools, and our commitment to accessibility and a first of its kind Slate integration. And you can see some of the people that we've worked with over the last few years. So if you're interested in knowing more about us, feel free to connect, ask any questions, or just chat with us on our website as well, olark.com. A little bit about me. My name is Osai Lasisi. Osai, I'm the head of demand generation here at Olark, and it's such an exciting place. And I'm also an adjunct professor in one of the universities here. So I really love higher ed. I think it's such an exciting field to be in. And now I want to tell you about Dr. Meghan Grace. She's just a phenomenal human being. And when she speaks, I'm just in awe. She is a researcher, consultant, international speaker, author, and an author. She's also the co-host of the podcast #Gen Z and co-author of the book Generation Z Goes to College and Generation Z, A Century in the Making. My apologies. She's not a co-host of the podcast. She is the host of the podcast. And she studied Generation Z. She's been studying Generation Z since 2014. She and her research partner, Dr. Corey Similar, lead the Institute for Generational Research and Education. So, she is an expert. She has been studying this since 2014, and she has a lot of insights. And today we're going to be talking about very applicable insights that you can start to use today to connect with Gen Z. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Meghan, you can go ahead and share, and then we could start talking about it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Essie. It's always wonderful to connect with you. You always make me sound very cool, which I appreciate. And I'm excited to be back. I hope we have some friends that joined us in part one coming back for part two. That means you would hopefully at least had a good time last time, if not a great time. But today we're going to be focusing more a little bit on when we're thinking about marketing to Generation Z, what it means to build connection. And so to start us off, I always like to get our brains warmed up. If you're an athlete or you do any sort of physical activity, you got to warm up a little bit. So I want you to think about when you were a student, when was a time that you felt truly connected to your student experience? Go ahead and log that in the chat. But think back to your time. For some of us, it might be longer than others, and that's totally okay. But I think at some point we can all feel when we felt truly connected to your student experience. I feel like I have like 10 examples of this. But for me, a big portion of my experience was obviously being involved on campus and being able to connect with peers that shared similar ideals, similar aspirations. For me, it was my sorority and our fraternity sorority community. I just felt like there was a lot of students that had similar leadership ambitions, similar cares and concerns, and it felt me feel connected to a larger place on campus. So love seeing that come in on the chat. We've got living learning communities. We've got student organizations. Yes. I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Sometimes it's helpful for us to go back and think about ourselves as students, ourselves in the same phase of life that Generation Z is currently in, to draw that connection that we might be able to have with young people today. So today we are talking about Generation Z. That is our generation of young people born between 1995 and 2010. For those of you doing very quick math, those are our young people that are turning 27 this year. And at the very youngest, they're about turning 12, 11 to 12. So I don't know how they grew up so fast, but flies by. I feel like we started this journey and they were just starting college, and now they're deeply getting into their careers, and some of them are graduating from college. But that doesn't mean that we are past our time to think about Generation Z. There's still about another half of this generation that is pursuing education in some degree and potentially heading to college if that's their choice after secondary education. Just a quick recap for those who are like, who are the Gen Z? You probably have a lot of Generation Z in your life, whether that is professionally or personally. You might be raising some members of Generation Z. If you've got that teen and tween young adult in your life, you might have family members, cousins, nieces, nephews. You might have neighbors or members of your community, maybe a church or a religious organization. But they're definitely predominantly our students in higher education right now. They are traditionally college students, and they will be until the class of 2032. So we've got a bit of time. There are young alumni. So again, there are our young alumni within the last 5 or so years. And then some of them are actually our employees. There might be some members of Gen Z on this call, actually. But they are in the workplace now, and they're taking steps into their career. And so while today is talking more about Generation Z students, I think the next frontier for planning ahead is, well, how do we think about the workplace as well? So keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe we'll come back and do another session on that another time. But I want to, before we get into Generation Z, give us a refresh on what a generation is. Sometimes it's kind of this confusing thing. When I was thinking about defining a generation, I couldn't find a definition I liked, so I developed one myself. But when we're talking about a generation, and this is a refresh for some of the people that joined us in part one, we're really talking about a group of people born in a similar time frame who develop a shared set of values, behaviors, perspectives, and preferences in response to the societal events and experiences during their formative years. I point out formative years. Our formative years, again, are those teen and young adult years where we're developing our worldview. We're responding to the world. We're understanding how the world works. And there's this unique thing that happens that when we are doing that, we develop an understanding of the world alongside our peers. Whether or not we get along with our peers all the time, we magically all develop a shared kind of culture. We develop a set of values and behaviors and perspectives that we tend to gravitate towards. That's to say, not every member of Generation Z is going to fall in line with every bit of research. There's always going to be outliers. I kind of think it like your zodiac. Like you don't change your birthday, you can't really change your generation either. So it's like either you're a Cancer because you were born in July like myself, but like you can't change your birthday. Do I align with being a Cancer all the time? No, but sometimes I do, and that's kind of cool. But similarly, we can't change our generation. Sometimes I don't agree with all the things that are quote millennial, but other times I really, really do. And so when we think about, again, a generation, we're looking back and we're saying, what's going on in those very important developmental years, the years where we're starting to develop our own identity, our own understanding of the world, while still being influenced by people close to home. So our parents, family members, guardians, and different people that do share values with us. But when we think about what's shaping this generation, we can look at a variety of different areas. We can look at economics, we can look at government politics, we can look at technology and social issues, communication. We can look at that for every generation and understand them a little bit better. But for today, we look at Generation Z and we think about what have been concurrently happening while this generation is growing up and how is that shaping who they are and how they see themselves. And so we're seeing that this generation is being shaped by increased access to information, nearly constant connection. I think these two go hand in hand. This is where we see the influence of technology really, really being a part of this generation in new ways, especially digital and internet-based technology. We see budget cuts, disasters, tragedy, threats to personal safety, more of a focus on equity and equality within society and making that a more of a focus within organizations, workplaces, schools, throughout society. And then an ever-changing economy when it comes to work and how we're navigating, really paying our bills, if you will. And so we can really start to think about how this generation, for the last 10 years and probably for the next 5 more, are going to be shaped by what's happening right now. And so sometimes it feels like understanding a generation can be trying to find a moving target. That's why we use that framework of trying to understand what's going on technologically, what's going on economically, what's going on from a political and government perspective, and then what are the main social issues that people are talking about to really understand how society is evolving as it's evolving and what that means for young people today and how that's going to shape their perspectives, how it's going to shape their views. Again, these are the areas that are shaping Gen Z's cohort culture. But some of these things move pretty quickly. I mean, we can look at how technology has drastically changed just even in the last 10 years and how that shapes Gen Z, the way that they take in information, build relationships, really literally and physically navigate the world. So really when we take all of this, we get the question of who is Gen Z? How do we describe them? From a characteristics perspective, we see that this generation describes themselves as loyal, thoughtful, compassionate, responsible, open-minded, determined, and authentic. If you were with us last time, we did a little bit more of a deep dive in how we've looked at this in a few different studies, both within our data sets and then another data set to triangulate. And we're finding that these are some of the common characteristics that continue to emerge. When we first did our study in 2014, and then when we renewed it in 2021, we found that these 7 characteristics were largely the same. The order might have changed a little bit. Authentic jumped onto the list, something else dropped off the list. But realistically, we're seeing this generation is loyal, thoughtful, compassionate, responsible, open-minded, determined, and authentic. This is a generation that wants to do the right thing for people. They want to work hard, and they care about others, and they want to see things become better, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. We'll talk about that more in their motivation as well. And then we also have to note that just when we look at this generation, it's our most diverse generation to date, not only in their outward facing potential identities such as race and ethnicity, but we're seeing this generation is really encouraging all of us to think about identity and inclusion differently, saying who you are as a human is okay and loved, show up as who you are, and working to make sure that environments are inclusive to that. So they not only just value inclusion and being able to express their identity, it's something that they really are encouraging others, older generations, different environments to be focusing on, that humans are humans no matter what identities they possess. And so this is something they're going to bring into certainly their college and their higher education experience and beyond. I don't think they're just going to stop caring about these things after college. So it's something that I know as I talk with organizations from a company perspective, they're saying, how do we balance all of this when we know that this is a priority for our incoming and newer hires? So last time we all hung out together, we had a really much more of a focus on understanding Gen Z's decision making, right? So if we're thinking about marketing to Gen Z, if we're marketing something, we're oftentimes trying to say, well, we want them to be buying into something. And when I think about decision making, we looked at Gen Z's motivation, we looked at their relationships, we looked at money mindset, and we looked at concerns. And thinking about that has given a framework to think, well, okay, if I'm trying to encourage Gen Z to make a decision, these are kind of the areas I might want to focus. And really, the decision when we're thinking about growing enrollment yield, or if we're thinking about encouraging them to apply, encouraging them to seek us out in enrollment from an institution of higher education, those are the things they're going to be weighing. I could sit here and we could talk solely about today, thinking about, well, what does Gen Z want in higher education? What do they want in a post-secondary experience? And I'll tell you really quickly, but that's not what we're going to focus on fully today. When we look at Gen Z, I'd be remiss not to tell you, these are the things we continue to hear in conversations, and what we see in their motivation, and what we see in feedback, and what we hear about through our experiences with Gen Z, is that when they're looking at a college experience, they're looking on a return on investment. That sounds very consumer mindset, but I think it would be ridiculous not to say that students invest a lot of time, a lot of money to be able to participate in higher education. And that return on investment is not necessarily how we might see it in business, but something of value. That experience that they are looking for is something of value and something that aligns with values. They're looking for real world application. I think these two go hand in hand. They want to be able to say that what they're learning within college is something that they're going to take and apply somewhere else. And then really this generation, while they can think about, well, how do I get the most for the time and the money that I'm going to be investing in my education? Can I also frame it as a way to impact other people, that even when they're thinking from a consumer mindset, impact on others is something that is present, whether that is being involved in community service and community engagement activities, being able to work through clubs and organizations, being politically involved, being able to do meaningful work, interdisciplinary studies around social issues. The idea that they are able to give back in some capacity is really linked to their motivation. But today is not going to be a conversation around, how do I deliver this? I recognize that sometimes within our space, that's a really tall order to expect that you're going to be able to go back to your institution and say, well, we really have to focus on these things. And we really need to change the way that we do X, Y, and Z to align with this generation. I want us to be thinking from a personal level. Really, how do we think about connecting with Gen Z? And taking what seems like a very daunting task, and really demystifying this. Because yes, I do want you to be thinking, well, how do I portray the return on investment of this institution? How do I showcase the real world impact or the real world application our students are able to have? And yes, I do want to show that these student experiences have an opportunity to have an impact on others. I think it all comes back down to when we think about connection, what that actually means. As I was preparing for the session, I was like, well, connecting with Gen Z, what are the times in which I felt that I was doing my very best work, my very best efforts, and being able to learn alongside students, mentor students, and keep them engaged? And I think it comes down to, let's go back to thinking about human connection as our foundation for this entire conversation. When I think of human connection, and as I was thinking about, how do you even define human connection? There's so many different lenses. To me, I really loved these two definitions. When I think of human connection as the framing of how to engage Gen Z, it's the sense of closeness and belongingness a person can experience when having supportive relationships with those around them. A deep bond that's formed between people when they feel seen and valued. And for me, I think like human connection is that how you feel when you are just hanging out with your best friend, having the best day on a weekend, right? That is, I think, what we hope every student finds in higher education, that every student finds a fit where they feel closeness and a sense of belongingness and a deep bond to an institution. But that doesn't happen unless they feel seen and valued. And this is where I think it's important to talk about where some of this stuff has been role modeled to them. Because we will talk about two primary areas we'll focus on in building connection. But before we do that, I want us to look at Gen Z's influential relationships. So we touched on this briefly in our last session, but when we think about parents, family members, and peers, these are the people that Gen Z consistently in multiple studies, our own and others, list as their number one role models, most influential on their relationship or on their values. These are the groups of people that have the ability to, yes, leverage a decision-making experience for them. But I also want us to think about, and please feel free, put this in the chat. When you think about parents and family members, peers and teachers, what do all of these relationships have in common for Generation Z? Or in your life, when you think about your peers and family members, your parents, your teachers, what do all of these relationships have in common? So feel free, put that in the chat. Emily says mentorship. Yes. So there is, you can't really have mentorship without a meaningful connection, right? A good mentor knows you. A good mentor invests in you. You spend time with them. With them is important. Yes, thank you for putting that in the chat. So it's this idea, again, we can go back to that definition of human connection, this idea of feeling seen and heard, to be valued, to be invested in, but to also have the opportunity to truly connect. And so I also want to touch on when we think about them making new friends. So we've talked about the existing relationships, the people that truly impact their lives. But when it comes to relationships they want to build, I think we can learn a lot about how Gen Z views their friendship and who they want to be friends with, because we hope that they have similar, again, that the closeness, that belongingness, that deep bond that they want with friends, with an institution that they're going to hopefully enroll in. And so when we think about that, 73% of students in our study rated similar values as an important or very important factor in creating a new friendship. That's 3/4. I don't know what the other fourth were it wasn't maybe like the top thing they needed, but the overwhelming majority say they want to have similar values. I think sometimes we miss that opportunity when we talk about what we value and what we care about. And then nearly half said that they wanted to have similar hobbies with their new friends. That's not all of them, but that is something that was very important to them, that they have at least a way, again, to not only share their values, but share time together doing things. I mean, that's what a hobby really is. It's a way we pass time together, and we can build connection over that hobby. So what does a hobby translate to? Activities, opportunities on campus. And these are the things they're going to be looking for, not only in their friendships, but in institutions of higher education. And then on the other side, less than 20% felt similarly that being in a specific group or organization was necessarily like the most important factor, having a shared culture or background or physical appearance. I'm not saying like, let's not invest in our campus appearance, but to them, sometimes it is that connection that is going to matter. And so I want to frame when we think about building relationships and connection with Gen Z in the relationships they currently have. I think we all want to be in that space where we have that deep, engaging relationship with Gen Z. And then also when they're forging new relationships, we can use friendships as a proxy. I'm not saying we have to go out and become best friends with Gen Z. That might be a tall order, but at least understanding what matters to them in these relationships can be really influential in the ways in which we approach our interactions. And so to frame this, I want to share a quote that actually came from a podcast interview I just did recently with a teenager, a Gen Z teenager. Sometimes they're the scariest people because teenagers are a little bit scary regardless. But when they're the people that you study and you really are trying to understand, I always get a little nervous. But I was able to sit with Tyler Midick. He is the CEO and founder of TeamView, which is a Gen Z insights firm. He's 16. He'll make you feel like you've done nothing with your life because he's 16 and is a founder of something. But really just appreciated the conversation because when we talk about, I asked, what do outside organizations, what do people that want to engage with Gen Z need to know? And I really loved this quote. We want to cut through the BS. If you seriously want to get the attention of Gen Z, you have to provide some sort of value to us. Again, shared values. And make us be involved, like want to be involved. The best way people trying to reach Gen Z can get our attention is to become part of our community and to show us that you care. And I love this. I loved this quote. I love this snippet. I want to share it with everyone, because there's this really big, like everyone's like, the Gen Z puzzle, how do we fix it? These young people are craving human connection, especially after the 2 years. And so the last 2 years that we've all had, like human connection, we all need it. But to be 18 and saying, I'm about to embark in a new world and I'm a little overwhelmed, just like all college students have been before that. But to do that coming off of a pandemic, that connection with Gen Z, that human connection is going to be needed more than anything at this time. So I don't like to create a problem without creating a framework for how we're going to get through the problem, right? So we've got all these Gen Z young people. We're saying, how do we connect with them? They want human connection. How do we build relationships? Help, right? So let's keep it simple and to the point. When I think about what connection matters, when we think about the words that Tyler shared, when we think about those definitions around human connection, when we look at the influential relationships of Gen Z, I think about it comes back to motivation plus communication. Because motivation is ultimately what we value, and communication is ultimately how we articulate those values. How do we share that? And if we're really trying to do that, I think we can use these two areas to focus and be thinking about building human connection. I took those two definitions that I really liked of human connection and I morphed them together. I'm not going to write the dictionary and say that I made a better definition, but I like this one better. That human connection is a deep bond marked by a sense of closeness and belongingness because we feel seen and valued. So, small order we're going to get into today is more focused on how do we use these areas, and in a bit we're going to spend some time allowing you to reflect on your strategies and think about, well, what can I maybe add a little Gen Z friendliness to what I'm doing, because I never suggest people throw everything out and start anew, because you are already doing good work. But there's always opportunity to look back and say, what can I do to elevate that engagement? What can I do to further that connection that I have with the Gen Z that I'm working with or trying to engage? So we're going to dive into motivation. We touched on this last time, but I do this work all the time and I have to remind myself. The Gen Z sources of motivation fall within relationships, passion, and achievement. To me, when I think about motivation, it needs to be interwoven into everything we do, from the way we build things for the people we're trying to engage, to the messages, to the campaigns, to the ways in which we structure how we gather together to align with motivation. So with Gen Z, when we're thinking about relationship motivation, this comes in the form of not wanting to let other people down and wanting to make a difference for someone else. So again, this is not the I'm motivated by relationships because I want to be popular, I want to have friends. No, this is very deep. This is very intrinsic. They don't want to let people down. This is another kind of drive. And they want to make a difference for other people. They know that making a difference comes from, again, that engagement, that investment in people. And so think about, how do you build a relationship with Gen Z? I'm not saying walk into it, become friends with them, or, develop that relationship to the point where you're like, well, now don't go letting me down. No, it's not about that. But when we look at research on some of their biggest fears, the ones that break my heart is when 18-year-olds are like, my biggest fear is letting down my family, or that I will be a disappointment to the people in my life. And I'm like, you're a teenager. Please go enjoy your life. Like, please, yes, you might disappoint people and that's okay. But these are the things that are driving them. There's this drive to want to help other people, to be there for other people. Again, they self-describe as compassionate and loyal and responsible. So it's not surprising that we're seeing this manifest in their motivations. When we look at passion-oriented achievement, we see this fall within the kind of the areas of advocating for something they believe in and caring about a project or a task. So this is, again, that social cause, being involved with the cause that they care about, impact on others. But then also just having a care about the project, having a task that they really do maybe not enjoy, but they understand the scope of it. I talk often about the interns that I work with that are all Gen Z. Sometimes they don't really care about a task when I assign it to them. We have to have a conversation and say why this task matters, why it is part of a bigger important initiative, how it supports the organization, how it supports the team. I have to sometimes create that care for them. And then it's amazing. They take that determination that we know that they have, because they don't want to let me down, because we have a relationship. They want to make a difference because they know that that work does have meaning. And so again, this is an area where we can use framing as really important. And then when we think about achievement, this opportunity for advancement, receiving credit, and seeing the fruits of their labor. Whereas we see a lot of Gen Z's motivation gravitating towards their relationships with others and making an impact on others, we can look at their forms of achievement oriented motivation and say this is where some of their maybe individual or internal drive is coming from. So their opportunity for advancement, leveling up. What is the next mile marker in the race, really, for this generation? I feel like they're very driven. They've always got eyes on the prize, but sometimes that can feel very overwhelming and daunting. So how do we help them potentially scale into some of those goals and really making it clear what that opportunity for advancement looks like? This is a really good one for what I would consider daunting tasks or things that feel really large and overwhelming. College applications might be one of them, or thinking about just going through the entire enrollment process in general, that maybe finding ways to structure things so that we take all of the many tasks and breaking them up, giving them a little bit more structure and letting them know, like, okay, you're moving on to that next level. Receiving credit, again, coming a little bit from this idea of they want to get the pat on the back. They want to have this, I don't want to say the sticker of gold stars that say that they did it, but for sometimes it is the ability to articulate what it is. And then we see that kind of partnering with seeing the fruits of our labor or our effort. And so we see their achievement orientation being very different than I want to be the best, or I want to beat everybody else, or I want to compete with others. This is very individualized. It is very, my goals are my goals and I want to go after them, but somebody else can have different goals and that's totally okay. But I would also like to be recognized for my effort and see that effort. And so we're not saying this is a heavily competitive generation, but maybe potentially a collaborative generation, communal generation, while also saying, I still want to succeed, but success might not look like a competition. So how do we even think about using motivation? I'm never going to tell you how to do your job because you know how to do your job, but I can throw out some relatively, I would say, some things that have worked for me. And I will share that with you and you can take it or leave it. But when I think about aligning with motivation, sometimes it's a matter of crafting your message to speak to the source of motivation. In practice, this might look like, instead of saying you can meet new people, you might say something like you can connect with fellow students or people who share your values. Much more motivating to just about anybody, but especially to this generation. Lead conversations and experiences with discussing purpose to connect to their sources of motivation. In practice, say when we're discussing a process of how something happens, explaining the why behind a policy or a process. Because they're probably going to ask why. And if they don't ask why, and then the process is really annoying, or they might just put it online that it's a really annoying process. Or they might share about it. And then you've got brand issues, blah, 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 spiraling, right? Or you can say, this is the why behind this. Let's keep you clued in. Let's keep you informed. There's nothing wrong with that. And then you're allowing them to feel engaged and involved in that. So again, discussing purpose is something that sometimes we just assume our target audience knows. And sometimes we have to go back to that and explain, this is the purpose behind things to keep them engaged and involved. Again, and this is a big one, structuring experiences that connect with motivation. So I think developing processes and programs with tangible and clear milestones and checkpoints towards a goal. This sometimes is not as, sometimes we think like, okay, graduation is the goal. Great. There's 4 years and a lot of stuff that can happen between then and now. So how do we chunk out those 4 years? Or again, if we're going to take it back to the enrollment component of it, that's a long process. There's a lot of things that go into it. How do we break this down into something that's more digestible and less daunting and scary? Another way that we might do that is providing dedicated time to reflect on success and contributions. I think this is especially important for anyone that is working in advising roles or supervising in roles with Generation Z, that they want to see the fruits of their labor and they want to see credit. Like, we're not always going to walk around and give them gold stars and say, wow, thank you for completing every task. But I think it's important to have an opportunity on a regular basis to sit with the people that you're leading and mentoring to say, let's reflect on the last quarter, or let's reflect on the last semester. What are the things that you're especially proud of? Like that in a check-in conversation is not necessarily something that I will take a significant amount of time or potentially emotional labor, but speaks volumes to those that are Gen Z. And again, we're trying to build human connection here, right? And so that is something that reframing the way we check in with the people that we're trying to connect with that are members of Gen Z can really, really elevate that, again, that human connection component. So that's what I have a little bit for motivation. Again, you don't have to take all of these. If I have to give you a suggestion, I would say take the main bullet point and figure out how that applies to what you do. So if it's your messaging, if it's discussing purpose, if it's your structure, those are areas I would focus on. How do I think about integrating motivation to the different various aspects of the work that I do with Gen Z? And we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to move over to communication. And I think this is when I start to think about Gen Z and what it is that can be, why there's this craving for human connection is because in the ways in which we communicate today can feel overwhelming. It can feel not inhumane. I don't want to say that, but it can feel sometimes difficult to have that human connection and that true human connection. So I want to paint a picture for you. We've got a lot of members of Generation Z that say that they multitask across multiple devices a day and sometimes up to 5 screens throughout the day. And when you think about that, it looks something like this. They're on their computer, they're texting, they've got a tablet, they're watching TV, and they've got, a Fitbit or something that is keeping them connected. I'm guilty of this. I'm literally watching you all on my phone and my screen with my my Apple Watch on. I've got a second screen, and we're all connected like this. And it can feel overwhelming, right? This is young people, again, learning to navigate the world, build relationships, and they are pulled in so many directions. The demands for their attention and their engagement are high. And so when they are constantly pulled to an online world, it's not surprising that they are craving an opportunity to be with other people. I'm not saying that we can't be with other people through digital communication and through digital means, but it's really difficult to say that it is exactly the same. And they will use it, and we'll talk about kind of the difference there. But this I like to use as a framing of the reality of Gen Z and the ways in which they communicate and connect with other people looks a lot like this. And so, yes, they are connected to their devices, very much so. But this is what's been role modeled to them. And this is also just how they have learned that we communicate and connect with others, right or wrong. This is the way that the world operates. And so we sometimes have to go back, we being potentially older generations or leaders or people that have an opportunity to construct environments and spaces to say, well, let's actually disconnect from devices and get together and have meaningful conversation. Let's build the relationships that we want to build. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I think I can't tell you about, just technology use without talking about their preferences and where they are actually spending time. So we know that Gen Z is on social media. Welcome, see year 2022. But they're not using social media as like a blanket uniform, like they're doing everything the same way everywhere. They're not even posting to the same places the same way everywhere. They've really learned to curate an experience and their identity online. And so we've got, when we did our study, and it sometimes evolves, especially as we get new platforms coming into different spaces, it'll evolve a little bit, but we're still seeing this kind of tailored approach. And this has been present since we first started our studies, that they're using different platforms for different things. So where they are sharing their personal information is usually Snapchat. Some of them are using that more than they are text messaging. And so this is where they're connecting with friends, where they share about themselves. Where they're sharing expertise, content, or opinions, we see that showing up much more on Instagram, is what they've cited as the place they're doing that. Where they're learning or obtaining new knowledge, not surprising, very video oriented. So YouTube and TikTok. I think I mentioned in our last session that Gen Z is now using TikTok as in the form of Google. So I'm just absolutely fascinated by this. They're using this video medium to not only take in the news, but to learn things and using it from a tutorial perspective. So something to kind of keep in mind of if we're trying to teach them things, certainly video is a place where they want to see that. And we know that demonstrated and video-based learning is something that they do prefer. Keeping up with others, this is where we see Snapchat and Instagram kind of being their top platforms for that, as well as with influencing or persuading others. But we're seeing that this generation, not to the same degree as others, and just didn't rise to the top. Some are using Twitter. It's about 1 in 3, but it's not to the same frequency as other platforms. And then certainly they're not as often on Facebook, if at all, Pinterest, and then LinkedIn. So I think that some of that makes sense. Facebook doesn't feel like the Facebook when it was, I don't want to say a young person's game, but when it was college students only, it was hot and popping. Right now, that is their TikTok. That's where they're living. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. That is their Facebook of this day. Pinterest, they might not be just in that phase yet of what they need it for. And then LinkedIn. I think this will be a kind of a different situation as they start to progress into their careers, as they look at focusing a little bit more on that professional space. But there are some really strong users of Gen Z on on LinkedIn that are filling in those spaces that I think provide really good insight onto their perspectives on work. So if you're not on LinkedIn connected with some Gen Zers, I really, really encourage it. So let's do a quick breakdown. We see that when we ask them, how do you like to communicate? And then how do you actually communicate? We can see that there's some differences there. So largely they care most about wanting to communicate in person. After that, we see that they like to and will actually communicate by text message and other messaging platforms. We see video chat and phone call really falling away, and then email. Well, I think that if you've been a part of higher education for more than 13 seconds, you know that we are heavily reliant on email. Heavily. From the moment we try to engage with these young people to the minute they graduate and beyond, very reliant on email. And it makes sense. But we will continue to see a gap, and we will continue to see a pain point, I think, with that sole reliance on email. And so how do we get around this? The fact that they want to be talking in person and having in-person conversations. They don't mind doing video chat and kind of that face-to-face conversation through video chat. We know that they rely on messaging. And so this is really an area where there's no silver bullet to this, because we know that enrollment, especially enrollment management, is not necessarily something where we have the opportunity to sit down with every single student at their high school and give them a one-on-one conversation. And I know that enrollment management staff are very busy humans, and they are out at lots of high schools. But to say that we can do that for the millions of young people that graduate high school every year is going to be tough. So how do we scale what in-person conversations provide to young people? It's, again, our in-person conversations. If you think about the best coffee date you've had in the last 6 months, try to emulate that. The things that we care about in those settings are human connection, learning about someone, feeling like you share something in common, maybe having a laugh or two. And then, just in general, just feeling empowered after that. And so how do you take that and move it into other potentially scalable methods of communication? Text messaging, always a Wild West situation, depending on privacy and policies that occur within an institution, but it is where they are. And then I'm always wary about, do we need to be in their DMs? Maybe not. But we do know that that's a space where they do live. And we know that in some of the platforms that they're on, where they're learning about things, that messaging inbox can be really helpful. But we'll get back to that in a second. I always have to say it. The phone calls and the emails will be the biggest point of contention. It's not because they don't want to do these things. They would prefer to probably actually FaceTime over have a phone call. But the desire to be on a phone call or an email is just something they haven't really practiced. Again, rewind and go back to those influential relationships. They're not really required to have a phone call or email the people that matter the most to them and that they see most frequently. Those influential relationships of their family members, peers, and teachers, all those people they see in person, they are text messaging, even their teachers and their parents, their peers, they're not emailing them. And so I think that it is important that we keep all this in consideration. We can help Gen Z understand the importance of professional communication and why we have to do some things. Help them build the skill, help them build the habit of checking their inbox. But it might not be an immediate thing. So how do we do this? What is the strategy for engaging and connecting with Gen Z in this regard? The underlying theme, communicate to build relationships. First and foremost, I think we have to think about using in-person and face-to-face time wisely and intentionally. Why are we getting together? And are we fulfilling that? This is a big message to my instructors. Sometimes we think an in-person class is necessary so that we can go through the slides with them. But can they learn some of that on their own and then come to class and we can spend time building relationships, having conversations, practicing interpersonal skills, and making meaning together, right? But I think it also has something to say about when we're thinking about encouraging young people to go into higher education, the time that we spend with them in person talking about that. But also, this is a big one, use multiple channels of connection for different purposes. What this might look like is using text nudges, but sending a full email with detailed information. What this might look like. Way back when I had to run leadership programs for students over the summer, it was a treat of a time in the sense that students especially don't like to check their inbox over the summer. So I would send them these lovely messages about here's your flight time, here's when you need to arrive, here's the programming schedule, please send me your allergies, all of these things that come into planning an event, right? But for Gen Z, they were like, ma'am, I haven't checked my email. You know what they check like 96 times a day? I'm not even kidding you, is their phone. So I would send that beautiful long email and I would then send the message that said, hey, so-and-so, can't wait to see you at the event next week. Just a quick reminder and a nudge. I sent you a full email with all of your detailed logistics. Please make sure that you got this message. And once you open your inbox, please give me a thumbs up emoji. Simple enough. I'm where they are. I'm telling them what they need to do. They don't need to go read it right away. I just need to know that they're going to read it. So sometimes it's doubling up. How do you CC yourself on some of these things in your different communication methods? Be clear about communication expectations. I think this one's really, really important. In practice, have formal conversations about what, when, and how you will communicate and why you will do that. I think this one's important for anyone supervising Gen Z, anyone that is managing that relationship with Gen Z in an ongoing manner. Use an agreement if you need to talk about what your expectations are about when it's okay to call, if they need to call, how they should go about scheduling something with you. As members of older generations, I believe it's our job to kind of role model expectations and have really clear conversations around how we can build effective relationships. And so again, we'll go back to my interns. I say, yeah, you can text me if you need something really immediately, if you don't need something for 48 hours, and please send it via an email. Or you can send the email, and if you need to send me a text message to nudge me, totally fine. Or I say, my phone is always on between the hours of 9 to 5, but you might have a delayed response if you call or text after blank amount of time, or if I'm traveling. Again, I'm telling them so that they feel welcome and included to talk to me about what's going on in their lives. And then also leave some adult-free spaces for their peers. This is something that we've been keeping an eye on for a long time. It's called the creepy treehouse. So just because we know what social media platforms they use, that does not mean that we necessarily need to be on those platforms. So just because they're all hanging out on Snapchat, that might not mean that we all need to be on Snapchat. Building that relationship there, being really intentional about when adults, I apologize, when adults enter a space that was previously cool to their peers, they leave real fast. That is what we've seen happen with Facebook. We've seen that start to trickle around with places like Instagram, until there's a new app that we all jump on. Like we even saw it with a little bit of TikTok. They didn't leave TikTok, but they were like, why are older people on TikTok? It's not that they're ageist. It's that every generation wants a space to hang out with their friends where there's no older people. It's the tree house. It becomes infinitely less cool when your older sister or your parents show up, right? You want that peer-to-peer space. And so just being really intentional about where we use our opportunity to connect. So we are at that time. We've got about 10 minutes left. What I want to do is I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to put in the chat a small resource. I want you to utilize that, and you don't necessarily, we might not get all of it done today, and actually anticipate we won't. I want you to use that reflection worksheet to actually take back to your work and think, if I look at motivation and I look at communication, what I learned about Gen Z, what are the areas where I can think about my current practices? And again, adapt them slightly. Don't throw everything out. Adapting them slightly for increasing engagement, or adapting them slightly to better connect and better engage with Gen Z. So I'm going to take a quick second. And while we do that, if there's anybody that wants to provide within the chat some things that they've already been thinking about in the time we've been together, what are some strategies that you might explore wanting to pursue to better engage Gen Z? I'm going to put that in the chat for you right now.
Hi, Megan. As you're putting that in the chat, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I found that there was somebody, Andy, had some really great insights to share. Andy was saying that he was sharing some things about LinkedIn for grad students and things like that. I wanted to get your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think that, so thank you. I had not had a chance to like pop into the chat while I was talking. For LinkedIn, I don't think that they're like anti-LinkedIn. I just think that they're not fully, I don't know if I want to say this, if this is the right term, but like aged into like the value of LinkedIn. It's much like many of them are like, oh wait, so I've got to like create a resume to go do some stuff, or I've got to, what is this space for? I think anyone that's active on LinkedIn, I am like, LinkedIn's one of my favorite platforms. I find it to be the intellectual Facebook I've always wanted to exist, that's focused on my careers. So I'm not surprised that yes, it's one of the top spots for graduate recruitment and enrollment, because I think people, once they get to that phase of their life, they're like, I want to go back to school. I need to probably potentially develop my professional network, or I want to continue my education. So I need to kind of have that portfolio. And those are, again, our graduate and professional students are students that are likely thinking about career. The career's on the mind. And so they want to be on the platform that's about career. I would love to get more younger, like Gen Z, that are our first year and second year students on LinkedIn, to see that there's a network of people, especially from an alumni perspective, that are there to support and potentially provide that mentorship. So I think underutilized entirely by our young people. I'm like, if I ever meet a young person, I'm like, you better get on LinkedIn, you better add me, you better do like a profile consultation so that we can get that up and going. So I have added in the chat just a resource that you all can utilize. But I would love to see if there's any others that you've all been thinking about from a strategy perspective. Between communication and motivation, where are some areas where you might want to focus your time? And if you want to come off mute, you can totally do that. I'm going to come back and put my slide back up so that you've got that.
Awesome. And then there was the other comment that Andy mentioned, that face-to-face hasn't been as interesting since COVID. So maybe when you were doing the research, people shared in-person communication was important, but in application, that's not what he and his colleagues are seeing.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to why are we gathering in person, first and foremost, and how do we set the expectation around why we're gathering in person? So I think that there's just been a big block for a lot of people of like, from a productivity standpoint, can we be as productive remotely? Probably. But can we build a full-on relationship as much? Maybe not. But I think it really does come from communicating why we're gathering and what to expect, so that there is expectations are settled. I think that something that has been a really, really great resource as I think about designing both in-person and hybrid programs for clients and other people is that the Priya Parker's framework on why we gather, the art of gathering, is like fantastic and very straightforward. And I think it's so applicable to whether that's an in-person meeting or whether it's any sort of meeting, classroom, conference, birthday party, you name it. The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker really just gives you that really good framework of like, if you are the host of something, class, setting expectations, explaining the why, allows people to get bought in. And I think that's especially relevant and resonates with just where we're at right now as a society and getting back to life and what new normal looks like. But with young people in person, especially, they've had, you have to think like in the lifespan of, if you're an 18-year-old, 2 of your years were effectively atypical in terms of socialization and schooling. that's like 1/9 of your life. And that's like, by perspective, 2 years feels like an eternity. And so it's a practice. And they're already pre-pandemic a little bit apprehensive about in-person socialization, not because they don't want it, because they feel like they're less practiced at it. So there's a lot of things that are swirling around with that, of like pandemic plus just social apprehension of young people, and then expectation setting, and then being intentional about like, why do we gather and why do we need to be gathering in person, and making the most out of that. And I think that again, stating those expectations can help on a few different fronts, about like, the reason we're all here today is blank.
Awesome. So for everyone, if you have any additional questions or comments, or if you're ready to go on screen and ask your questions, please let us know. I am paying attention to the chat box and also to the Q&A box. So if any questions, but in the meantime, I just wanted to say once again, Dr. Meghan Grace, this has been awesome. Are you able to share a way for people to connect with you if they had more specific questions or things like that? Is LinkedIn the best way to reach you?
All of them. I don't want to be like, I'm only a LinkedIn girl. I'm on all of them. But as we wrap up, I know we've got some stuff in the chat. I will get over to that in a second. My last thing before we go is just like, why connecting with this generation matters. And this is my favorite quote. I shared, if you've seen me speak before, I shared it in every session, because it grounds me in what I do, but it also just puts into perspective when we talk about purpose. This generation sees themselves as a group of people that are both dreamers and doers. They want to make the world cleaner, more efficient, easier. They see countries and communities coming together, and they want to work to achieve it. And I think that we have an opportunity as educators, as people that want to engage them in meaningful spaces, to make this happen. And it is that focus on connection, building human connection with these young people, is my number one priority. And I hope that it can be a priority for you. I know we've got some questions, but I do want to leave you with my contact information. I'm available in a lot of places. LinkedIn is a great one. Share a lot of stuff there, but I'm on a variety of different social media. And then if you need to connect with me via the inbox, that is the one. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Olark for having me. It's been wonderful to be a part of this series, and to be able to contribute a little bit to this space of how do we engage the young people today in what I think many of us see as an incredibly important opportunity in higher education. So thank you all, and we'll address questions with the few minutes we have left.
Thank you. So the main question is, explain assignments to purpose, explicitly stating its connection to learning outcome and how it can help them in their education or learning experience.
I think that's great. With every assignment, another thing you can do is have them do like a 2-minute reflection on the real world skill they used. So it's as simple as, if they have to write a group paper, we all don't like writing group papers, but we know that sometimes it's necessary. What is the real world skill? Like, you can even use those terms, like, what skill did you use? How will it help your job? I think that is something that we don't spend enough time doing, is having them articulate back to us. What did you learn beyond the content of this? Like, what's a skill that you practiced? So I love that. I think that's a great, don't just tell them why they're doing the project. I think that is a huge piece of it. Helping them make a clear connection is a really big deal. So I love that that's a strategy that you're going to be working on. I think we are at our time.
We are at time.
Yeah. If there's
Thank
any
you
other questions,
so much.
feel free. Yeah, feel free to reach out. It was wonderful.
Yes, if any questions come up, you can email me, or you can email connect with Meghan. And if you email me, I'll make sure that she gets to it. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.